You probably already have it sitting right under your sink. That cheap blue and green box from the local hardware store that costs about $2. It's been a staple in American homes for well over a century. And the grubs tearing up your grass, the ants raiding your pantry, the pests chewing through your tomato plants, they're complete defenseless against it. Absolutely zero defense. But the massive garden brands can't exactly sell you a $40 jug of something you can buy with the spare change in your cup holder. So they'd much rather you stayed in the dark about the tricks my grandpa taught me before I was even old enough to read. Today, I'm going to walk you through 11 ways traditional farming communities have used ordinary borax to protect their homes and gardens. And listen closely, because that final one, number 11, is a closely guarded secret that almost nobody outside of our old school circles has ever heard. That specific trick is the entire reason I hit record today. So, stick around for it. And before we dive in, drop a comment below and let me know what state your tuning pest is giving you the biggest headache this season. Slugs, fire ants, squash bugs, let me know. I read every single one. I still have a vivid memory of being about 7 years old, balancing on a milk crate next to my mom at the kitchen sink in our old farming community. I watched her stir a dash of fine white powder into a glass jar filled with warm sugar water. The ants had discovered our bread box. By the time the sun came up the next day, that ant trail was completely wiped out. She didn't buy any fancy traps. She just knew that the powder was borax, a naturally occurring mineral that's been hauled out of the dry western desert lake bed since the late 1800s. Decades later, a major agricultural university actually published research proving what my mom already knew. Low-dose borax bats can completely eradicate an entire ant colony in under 3 days once the worker ants carry it down to their queen. The scientific community finally documented what traditional folks had been quiet doing at their kitchen counter for generations. So, let's get right into it. Number 1 is that exact ant colony killer my mom relied on, and I can tell you it still worked wonders on every species I've tested on, even those relentless southern ant varieties. The magic of borax is that it doesn't kill them on contact. That's the whole point. The worker ant comes along, drinks up that sweet sugar water, and takes the slow-acting poison right back to the nest. They feed the queen and the brood, and the entire colony essentially collapses from the inside out. Just mix 1 teaspoon of borax with a half cup of sugar and 1 cup of warm water. Stir it up until it dissolves clear. Soak a few cotton balls in the liquid and lay them on an old jar lid right next to the ant trail. Whatever you do, don't spray the trail and don't squash the scouts. You need them alive so they can carry the bait home. Give it 3 days and your ant problem is done for the year. But dealing with ants is just scratching the surface. Let's head out to the yard. Number 2, slugs and snails. If strawberries, lettuce, or hostas, you already know the frustration of finding slimy trails and chewed up leaves first thing in the morning. Borax pulls moisture straight out of a slug's soft exterior, much like salt does, but without leaving heavy, toxic salt deposits that ruin your topsoil. Just sprinkle a very thin dry of borax, about at half in your plants. Make sure to keep the powder off the stems and leaves. Reapply it after a heavy rainstorm. The slugs simply won't cross that line. I had an uncle in old farming settlement who kept his cabbage crop flawless. All summer long used this exact method. Slugs might be slow, but this next issue moves fast. Number 3 is flies in your carpets. And yes, this absolutely ties in the garden because those fleas hitch a ride indoors on your dog after playing in the yard. The Main Street Mark will happily charge you $200 for a professional exterminator. Instead, we just lightly dusted fine borax in the carpet, used a soft, bristled broom to work it deep in the fibers, let it sit for 24 hours, and then vacuumed it all up. The mineral completely dehydrates the flea eggs and larvae buried deep down where standard chemical sprays never penetrate. Do this once at the start of summer and once when fall hits. Just make sure to keep your pets and little ones out of that room while the powder sits. It completely severs the reproductive cycle, so you aren't stuck buying expensive pet store treatments month after month. Number 4 deals with cockroaches. Nobody likes talking about them, but every older farmhouse gets a couple, and a buddy of mine down south swears they grow as big as field mice down there. Take equal parts of borax and regular white flour, or use powdered sugar if you prefer. Dust a very fine line of it under the stove, behind the fridge, and along the back edges of your cabinets. When a roach walks through it, they instinctively groom the powder off their legs, ingest it, and they're dead within 48 hours. A prominent agriculture of the office even ran field trials showing that borax bats knocked out German cockroach populations by over 90%. It's a dirt, cheap powder backed by real science. But roaches are an indoor problem. Let's step back outside because this next application actually saves vegetable yields. Number 5 is treating boron deficiency in your dirt. Now, this isn't about killing off a bug. This is about nourishing your soil. Borax provides a crucial micronutrients that likewise likes broccoli, carrots, apples, beets, cauliflower, and especially tomatoes desperately need to produce healthy fruit. If you're pulling up beets with a cork-like texture, cauliflower with brown centers, or apples covered in pits, your ground is starving for boron. Take 1 level tablespoon of borax, dissolve it in a gallon of water, and spray that mixture evenly across 1,000 square feet of your garden. Do this just once a year in the springtime. That's all it takes. Respected university extensions have recommended that exact ratio for decades. Do not double the recipe. Boron is incredibly beneficial in small whispers, but it is highly toxic if you shout it. Fix the soy deficiency, and you'll watch your harvest multiply. So, what about the flying pests? Number 6, chewing up your porch beams or wood pile. This trick literally saved a family barn. Keep mixing borax into warm water until the powder just stops dissolving. Usually around 1 part borax to 8 parts water. Take a brush or sprayer out and coat any bare, unpainted wood. Hit your fence posts, the barn sill plates, the underside of your deck, or the firewood you're about to stack indoors. The solution penetrates deep in the wood fibers. When a carpenter ant or termite tries to chew through it, the borax destroys the bacteria in their gut, making it impossible for them to digest cellulose. They end up starving to death inside their own tunnels. As long as that wood is protected from direct, driving rain, the treatment holds up for years. The commercial brands sell a product that does the exact same thing for $60 a gallon, and I'm telling you straight up, it's just the same active ingredient dressed up with a slick label. But fighting bugs is only part of the job. You also have to protect what's already growing. Number 7 is for everyone who reached out saying their garden is already fully planted. The beds are mulched, the tomatoes are chest high, and they assume this advice was only for early spring. Pay attention, because you can knock this out this weekend. I'm talking about powdery mildew on your zinnias, cucumbers, and squash. That chalky white spread on the leaves that overtakes the plant faster than you can manage. Mix 1 teaspoon of borax and 1 tablespoon of regular cooking oil into a gallon of water. Give it a really vigorous shake. Go out early in the morning before the direct sun hits and thoroughly spray both the tops and bottoms of the sick leaves. The borax alters the pH level of the leaf surface so the fungus can no longer survive, and the oil ensures the mixture sticks. Do 3 rounds of this, spaced 4 days apart. I've personally salvaged squash vines. I was about seconds away from ripping out of the ground and throwing in the fire pit. You don't have to pull your plants. You just need to treat them. Mildew isn't the only nuisance creeping around the yard, though. Number 8 is for the weeds bursting through the cracks in your patio, driveway, and sidewalks. Now, keep this far away from your garden beds because borax will absolutely kill anything green it touches. But for those concrete seams where nothing should be growing anyway, dissolve a cup and a quarter of borax into a gallon of warm water. Wait for a dry, sunny afternoon and pour it directly into the crack. Your creeping Charlie, dandelions, and crabgrass will be totally dead within a week, and they won't come back the rest of the year. My dad used this trick around the outbuildings every summer. No need for a $40 jug of harsh chemical weed killer. No heavy-duty masks or rubber gloves required. Just a standard watering can. You get to skip the expensive toxic stuff because the solution was sitting in the pantry the whole time. Number 9 is dealing with mice in the chicken coop and the tool shed. It'll be totally upfront. Borax does not kill mice quickly, but what it does, though, is act as a heavy deterrent. They refuse to cross a thick line of it, much in the same way they avoid steel wool or strong peppermint. Lay down a generous, thick band of dry borax across the doorway of your shed and outline the base of your grain bins and animal feeders. The powder clings to their paws. They try to groom it off and quickly decide your property isn't worth the hassle. They'll just move on to a different yard. It's not the most glamorous solution, but it's honest, and it keeps your livestock feed safe. We are almost at the one I promised you, so hang tight. Just one more before the big reveal. Number 10, mold and mildew growing on the dark, north face side of the house, under the porch, or down on the cellar walls where the sunlight never hits. The mains you to spend $9 on a spray bot of mildew remover that is basically just watered down. We just dissolve a borax into a quart of steaming hot water, take a stiff bristle brush, and scrub it right in the mold. The key here is you do not rinse it off. You leave it. The borax continues to work, pulling the moisture right out of the mold spores for weeks. My grandmother used to scrub her basement stairs with this every spring. She lived to 87, and her base never once had that musty, damp smell. It's just like fresh, clean stone. All right, here we are at number 11, the one I've been saving. This is a method that almost nobody outside of the traditional off-grid farming communities knows about. The only reason I even know it because my wife's father, a lifelong orchard grower and beekeeper, pulled me aside one fall afternoon on it. It's for the codling moth. That's the worm that ruins your apples. It is arguably the single most destructive pest for backyard fruit trees in the country. And it's the exact reason you bite into an apple and find a brown tunnel chews straight to the core. Every single nursery catalog out there will try to sell you pheromone traps for $15 a pop, sticky tape, and expensive spray bottles that you have to reapply 7 times a summer. Here is our workaround instead. And you really ought to write this down. In the late winter, right before the tree buds start to swell, so late February if you're down south, or late March if you're up north, grab a thick paintbrush. Mix up a heavy paste of warm water and borax until it looks and feels like thick cream. Paint a wide, solid band of that paste entirely around the trunk of your apple tree, starting about a foot off the dirt and painting up to the 3-foot mark. That is literally it. Those moth larvae spend the winter hiding deep inside the bark crevices on the lower trunk. When the weather warms up and they start their journey up the tree to attack the fresh buds, they are forced to crawl across that painted band. The borax completely wipes them out long before they ever taste a single leaf. One application, one tree, and it costs pennies. This specific technique was actually published in an old federal agricultural bulletin way back in 9944, and then it mysteriously vanished from the updated printings right around the time the big post-war chemical corporations took over the market. My father-in-law was taught this by his dad, who learned it from a newspaper clipping tacked to the wall of an old smokehouse back in the 1920s. I've personally run this method on my own 4 apple trees for over a decade. Last autumn, I sliced into 40 random apples to inspect them. 38 were flawless, pristine clear to the core. The remaining 2 had 1 bug each. That is exactly the type of abundant, nearly free harvest that the garden catalogs do not want you to experience. So there you have it. 11 incredibly effective uses for a $2 box of borax that traditional growers have relied on while the broader public has been slowly conditioned to drop hundreds of dollars every spring on plastic bottles and chemical bags that barely even work. We didn't lose this old school knowledge by accident. It simply wasn't lucrative for the massive companies to pass it down. But we are take it back, one simple pantry staple at a time. And let me tell you, that is a small taste of freedom that most folks have completely forgotten about. If you are the type of person who flat out refuses to hand over $40 for something that a $2 box can easily handle, you are in the right place. Once again, let me know in the comments what state you're gardening in and what specific problem is driving you crazy this year. I read them all. I reply to what I can, and your exact question might just be the inspiration for the next video. Hit that subscribe button if you want to keep reclaiming the practical, nonsense skills that built this country back before everything had a corporate price tag attached to it. In my next video, I'm going to reveal exactly what 1 single cup of plain ash from a wood stove will do to the absolute worst weed plaguing American lawns. There is one specific weed that absolutely can't survive it, and I'll break it all down for you next time. But before you click away, I want to circle back and hand you a few more honest facts, because I've been receiving actual, handwritten letters from viewers across the country, from the Midwest down to the South, and all the way out West. People are asking me to dive a little deeper in the borax itself, where it actually comes from, the science behind why it works. And why, if it's such a miracle worker, the local county extension agents never bring it up anymore. So pull up a chair, hang out for just a few more minutes, and let me share the rest of the story with you. That white powder sitting under your kitchen counter is sodium tetraborate. It's a naturally mined mineral, not something concocted in a laboratory. The most massive deposit of it in the entire country sits out west in the deserts of California. They've been pulling the exact same mineral straight out of the earth since the 1870s, back when those rugged pioneers first started. Hauling it across the scorching desert used those massive 20 mule teams you might reckon from vintage soap advertisements. And that wasn't just a marketing gimmick. Those teams were the real deal. 20 mules hauling 2 heavy wagons and a massive water tank, dragging 10 solid tons of borax at a time across over 160 miles of brutal, open desert to reach the railway. For over half a decade in the late 1800s, those teams operated without losing a single wagon. That sheer grit is what built the very supply chain that lets you grab a box for $2 at the corner grocery store today. Now, here is the crucial detail regarding your yard. As I mentioned earlier, when applied in very small, carefully measured amounts, borax acts as a critical micronutrient. At its core, the element boron is something every single fruit, berry plant on your land requires in trace amounts in order to successfully produce blossoms. If your pepper plants refuse to yield, your tomatoes are constantly dropping their flower maturely, or your apple trees are loaded with blossoms in the spring but look totally bare by harvest time, it is almost guaranteed to be a boron deficiency in your soil. I've seen it time and time again, and the old agricultural experts who wrote the manual back in the 30s and 40s backed it up. To fix it, take 1 absolutely level tablespoon of borax, dissolve it into 2 gallons of warm water and pour it in credit slows around the drip line of a mature fruit tree. But here is the catch. You only do this once every 3 years, not every season, every 3 years. I pulls that specific recipe straight from an old government farming bulletin printed back in 9935. back in an era when the federal government still handed out straightforward, practical advice to working class folks. If you dig around online, you can still find scanned copies of it. Needless to say, they definitely aren't handing those out at the local garden center these days. Now, I always shoot straight with you, and I am not here to sell you snake oil. Borax is a salt. If you apply too much of it, it will completely scorch your plants right down to the root system and leave that patch of dirt completely sterile for years. That is exactly why the old Timers were religious about measuring in tiny spoons instead of dumping cups of it in the dirt. A tiny teaspoon for the kitchen ants, a carefully dissolved tablespoon for the orchard tree, or 2 dry tablespoons thoroughly mixed into a massive 5-gallon bucket of sand to create a perimeter barrier around a foundation. Those are precise measurements, not casual suggestions. He once saw a handwritten recipe card from an older woman, Au, in a traditional farming community. She had aggressively underlined the word level 3 separate times, a perfectly level teaspoon. Not heaping, not a generous pinch. The folks who worked the land back then understood that the only difference between a cure and a poison is the dosage, and they respected that boundary the same way you'd respect a roaring fire. I also want to tackle a very fair question that's been popping up in the comments lately. A viewer recently asked, if this stuff is safe as you say, why does the modern packaging carry a giant warning label? It's a great question, and the reality is something most companies prefer not to talk about. A little over a decade ago, overseas regulatory agencies decided to reclassify borates as a potential reproductive hazard. But here is the context. That warning was based on extreme high-level industry exposure. We're talking about miners physically breathing in heavy clouds of borax dust for 8 hours a day over a 30-year career. It had absolutely nothing to do with placing a single teaspoon of bait on a jar lid under your kitchen cabinets. But because it's vastly cheap for massive corporations to print one single terrifying warning label that legally covers them across the entire global market, the American boxes just followed suit. So yes, the packaging looks much more intimidating today than it did in the 1950s. But the powder inside the cardboard is the exact same natural mineral your own grandma used to soak the family laundry. Just read the box and use common sense. Keep the raw powder completely out of reach of your toddlers and your dogs, exactly the same way you safely. Store your harsh dish soaps or cleaning vinegars and strictly adhere to the tiny dosages I just laid out. That's really all there is to it. I'll leave you with this one final thought before I sign off. An old Timmer I knew who farmed a modest plot of land up until he passed away in his ninities once told me a profound truth. He said the only real difference between a garden that genuinely feeds a family and a garden that just causes endless stress boils down to about 6 crucial decisions a year. Knowing when to put seeds in the dirt, when to lay down the mulch, when to soak the ground deep instead of just watering the surface, when to simply walk away and let nature handle it, when to rip out a plant that's a lost cause, and finally knowing when to dig through your own kitchen cupboards instead of reaching for a glossy catalog. He told me that last decision didn't cost him a single dime for nearly 6 growing seasons, yet it helped feed his kids, dozens of grandkids, and plenty of folks who showed up at his porch every summer hoping for a handout. That mindset is exactly what I want to pass on to you. I'm not pushing a product or a gimmick. I'm trying to hand you a perspective where your own pantry is the very first place you look for a solution when things go sideways in the dirt rather than the very last. Let the expensive garden centers wait. That $2 box has been sitting patiently under your sink this entire time, just waiting to do the heavy lifting that nobody else ever bothered to tell you it could do.